Contactless immigration channels for certain travelers at Shenzhen Bayport and Zhuhai Gongbei Port. Jimmy Lai takes a stand to defend himself against national security charges. And the U.S. Embassy shuts its embassy in Kyiv after Ukraine fires long-range missiles into Russia. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Starting today, some Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland travelers are able to cross the Shenzhen Bayport and Zhuhai Gongbei Port without the need to show their travel documents. The pilot scheme helps shorten the clearance process, which takes less than 10 seconds. As the Shenzhen Bayport opened at 6:30 this morning, among the first batch of travelers was Mr. Bao, a Hong Konger who lives in Shenzhen.
不用1秒就通过了。
He said it took him less than a second for border clearance, and he doesn't have to search through bags to fish out his travel documents anymore. Travelers just have to scan their faces before entering the E-channel, scan their facial features one more time, as well as their fingerprints. The clearance process takes less than 10 seconds. Still, some encountered difficulties and had to present their physical documents in the end. The document-free clearance measure applies to Hong Kong residents aged 14 or above who hold a valid home return permit. Mainland residents who hold a valid exit entry permit to Hong Kong or have valid stays for family visits, business purposes, etc. can also use the self-service channels. Some hope the measures can be extended to cover students aged below 14, especially pupils who study across the border. The measure also began today at Gongbei Port in Zhuhai. Authorities remind people that they should still carry their physical travel documents when they are traveling across the border. The government has unveiled the latest development blueprint for the Hong Kong part of the Hotel Shenzhen-Hong Kong Science and Technology Innovation Cooperation Zone near the Shenzhen border. Authorities are planning a contactless border clearance process with drone delivery pilot schemes. Phase 1 of the Hotel Shenzhen-Hong Kong Science and Technology Innovation Cooperation Zone in the Lok Ma Chau Loop is set to span 1 million square meters. Poised to complete construction at the end of this year are their residential sites for workers and 2 biotech labs. 60 institutions, including mainland universities and laboratories, have signed memoranda of understanding, expressing interest to set up shop there. Unveiling the 58-page development outline for the Tech Zone's Hong Kong section, the Innovation Technology and Industry Bureau set sights on building top international labs there in the fields of life and health tech, artificial intelligence, and advanced manufacturing.
Will be established under the vision of one river, 2 banks, one park, one zone, 2 parks. Okay, so this is a very unique development.
By 2030, the first stage of its development, the government hopes to have the first phase of the zone's ecosystem completed, with established mechanisms with the Shenzhen side. Then by 2035, they hope the tech zone can achieve an international leading position. On the basis of the one country, 2 systems principle and the one zone, 2 parks concept, the zone aims to streamline the cross-border flows of people, supplies, capital, and data. That's through the construction of footbridges across the river, simplifying the vetting processes and cross-boundary clearance procedures for scientific research materials and equipment, etc. Also, a contactless clearance process for personnel traveling could be introduced.
People would have to be pre-registered. In terms of who they are, they should be the employees of the tenants of the 2 parks so that they do have the need to commute between the 2 parks frequently.
Sun Dong stressed the new border crossing in the hotel area is only for the use of relevant park personnel. The relevant policies will be handled by the Security Bureau. Another collaboration with Shenzhen, drone-assisted delivery of supplies. The takeoff and landing points for drones to promote the low-altitude economy have already been designated. Back locally in West Kowloon Court today, former media tycoon and founder of the now-defunct newspaper Apple Daily, Jimmy Lai, took a stand to defend himself against national security charges. Lai was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces and 1 count of conspiring to publish seditious materials. Mo Sang-ai reports.
The national security trial of Jimmy Lai resumed at West Kowloon Court on Wednesday morning after it was adjourned in July. Lai's wife and Cardinal Joseph Zhang, a retired Catholic bishop of Hong Kong, went to the court. On the 93rd day of the trial, the former media tycoon took the stand. Lai said he had established Nix magazine in 1989. Speaking in his own defense, Lai said he started the media business because he saw an opportunity to provide information to deliver freedom after June 4th. When the defense counsel asked him to explain freedom in that context, Lai said people with more information will know more and have more freedom. As to why he started operating Apple Daily in 1995, Lai said it was a natural expansion for someone who was already in the media business. The defense asked Lai if Apple Daily had any core values. He said the newspaper's core values aligned with those of Hong Kongers, including the rule of law, freedom of democracy, and freedom of speech. Lai said both he and the newspaper opposed violence and claimed he never advocated Hong Kong and Taiwan's independence. Speaking of his reasons, Lai said the ideas were never a reality and crazy. He said he did not allow Apple Daily staff and the paper to mention those issues. The defense showed the founding editorial of Apple Daily published in June 1995 under the title of We Belong to Hong Kong. Lai said he wrote the article and was the only editorial he had ever written. The defense asked Lai about his relationship with Benedict Rogers, the co-founder of Hong Kong Watch. Lai said Rogers would contact him when he wanted to publish some articles. As to why Lai donated £20,000 to the organization, Lai said he thought Rogers did something meaningful and he supported Hong Kong. Lai also said he had met with Tsai Ing-wen, the former leader of Taiwan. Lai described the meetings with Tsai as her PR gestures because of his Apple Daily Taiwan. In mid-2019, Lai met with former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and former U.S. Secretary for State Mike Pompeo in the White House. He said it was not his plan to meet the two politicians. He was informed about meeting Pompeo after arriving in Washington. Lai said his initial purpose of the trip was to meet senators and congressmen about the situation in Hong Kong. Lai said he had only asked Pence and Pompeo to voice out for Hong Kong during the talks. Lai said he is a social activist and not a politician. He said he did not have the ability to pollute or corrupt the mind of readers. The trial has been adjourned until Thursday. Lai waved and smiled to his family members, including his wife, at the start of the hearing. Memos 9, TVB News.
The U.S. has shut its embassy in Kyiv after a significant warning. In another development, U.S. President Joe Biden has given Ukraine anti-personnel mines. Moscow says Ukraine has fired long-range missiles into Russia, days after that measure was approved by Biden. The Kremlin is accusing Washington of escalation. David Garrett reports.
The US Embassy in Ukraine is closed. Staff members were told to shelter. The State Department says they had information about a specific air attack. Meanwhile, Moscow says Ukraine has fired 6 US-supplied ATACMS missiles into Bryansk. Washington reportedly approved the use of the long-range missiles just days ago. Russia's foreign minister called it a signal of US escalation. As the US provides Ukraine with greater fighting power, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed into law a loosening of restrictions of Russia's nuclear weapons use. Putin says any attack on Russia aided by a nuclear-armed country could constitute a situation which would lead to nuclear war. The US called this language irresponsible rhetoric. To give Ukraine anti-personnel landmines to slow Russian advances. Ukraine's military has already been getting extensive training from Britain's military in the use of landmines. 50,000 Ukrainian recruits have been trained on British soil.
A much more important job since you've got Australians, you've got Swedes, you've got a bunch of other nations from NATO that are working with us. It just goes to show it's a much bigger thing than a lot of people seem to realise now. It's bigger more than it was before.
US President-elect Donald Trump has not only vowed to de-escalate, but stop the war when he enters the White House in January. It seems in his last weeks in office, current President Biden is determined to put Ukraine on a stronger footing. David Garrett, TVB News.
The U.S. Defense Secretary says the Mutual Defense Treaty between Washington and Manila applies to an armed attack in the South China Sea. Lloyd Austin is in Laos to join a meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Defense Ministers. Austin was seated with Lao Defense Minister, whose country is the chair of ASEAN this year. In addition to the United States, China is represented along with Japan, South Korea, India, and Australia. Austin had been in the Philippines pledging support for ASEAN, saying he had serious concern about destabilizing actions in the East and South China Seas and mentioned China.
comes to what we will do, I won't make it, I won't speculate or make about any hypotheticals when it comes to our mutual defense treaty. But we have emphasized, and you heard me just emphasize it a couple of minutes ago, that we remain committed to the treaty. We stand with the Philippines. I won't speculate on what the next administration will do. What I can tell you is what I know. And what I know is that I've seen strong support for the Philippines in both parties in the United States.
China's defense minister reportedly declined to meet with his U.S. counterpart during a summit of Asian defense ministers in Laos. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations Defense Ministers Meeting Plus was held in Vientiane. The Pentagon sought to arrange a bilateral meeting between Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun and U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. It was part of their efforts to maintain military-to-military communication between the two nations, a key point stressed by President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden at their meeting in Peru. Some American media reported that China rejected the meeting because of a recent U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, which was worth $2 billion. Beijing earlier condemned the move, saying it would seriously undermine China-U.S. relations and peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump flew to Texas on Tuesday to join Elon Musk and watch a test flight of SpaceX's Starship rocket. It's the latest sign of a deepening bond between Trump and the world's richest man, who is also the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla. Trump was greeted by Musk upon his arrival. Musk spent around $200 million to help Trump beat Democrat Kamala Harris in the recent election. Later, the sixth test flight of the Starship rocket got underway. Trump looked on, showing little emotion. And still ahead, President Xi Jinping in Brasilia for a state visit after attending the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Red paint splashed on various parts of the central government offices in Admiralty. Welcome back. The 19th G20 summit of heads of state in Brazil drew to a close on Tuesday. In a final declaration issued at the conclusion of the summit, G20 leaders affirmed their commitment to building an open and stable financial system to shore up economic growth. Ongoing wars in Ukraine and Gaza were discussed during the two-day meeting. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he regretted that the final declaration did not underscore Russia's responsibility in starting the Ukraine war. Danny Zhou has more.
The Rio de Janeiro declaration was issued on Tuesday as the two-day G20 summit came to a close. Under the theme of building a just world and a sustainable planet, leaders pledged to continue their support for developing countries. They pressed for a reform in global governance, with the aim of promoting multilateralism and increasing representation of the global south. Special attention was paid to coordinated actions to combat climate change, poverty and hunger. Hopeful about soft landing for the global economy, the G20 has committed itself to fostering conditions for sustainable, inclusive and resilient global development. And it advocates regulating artificial intelligence. A big talking point in this year's declaration is the group's pledge to work cooperatively to ensure that the super-rich are effectively taxed, so as to fund urgent sustainable development initiatives. Also noted are the world's critical hotspots. The declaration stressed all states must refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. G20 leaders expressed united support for a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza and de-escalation in Lebanon. It's usually issued at the end of the summit, but this time the Brazilian president decided to approve the text while wrapping up Monday's plenary session, at a moment the leaders of France, Germany and the United States were not in the room. Danny Zhou, TVB News.
President Xi Jinping held bilateral talks with European and South American leaders on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. He has now landed in Brasilia for a state visit to Brazil. The Chinese leader arrived in the Brazilian capital Tuesday afternoon and was warmly welcomed by senior officials and overseas Chinese. In a written statement made upon his arrival in the largest South American country, Xi said he anticipates in-depth discussions on issues of common interest with the Brazilian leader to enhance relations and promote the synergy of their development strategies. Prior to that, President Xi held talks with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz during the G20 summit. He said it is hoped that Europe and China will resolve the issue of steep import tariffs on electric vehicles via dialogue and negotiations, pledging that China will continue to provide broad market opportunities for German enterprises. When meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, Xi called for the strengthening of communication and mutual support in various fields. Macron pointed to the two countries' unique ties and stressed Paris would continue its push for strategic autonomy. President Xi also met with Bolivian President Luis Arce and Argentinian President Javier Milei to boost bilateral trade. Parts of the central government offices in Admiralty were found to have been daubed with red paint. A government spokesperson said no unlawful behavior will be tolerated. At about 8:30 a.m., the police received a report about red paint splashed around the exterior wall, planters, and the ground near the central government offices on Tinmay Avenue. Glass shards were also found on the ground. It is understood that surveillance footage captured someone hurled a glass bottle filled with red paint from a footbridge nearby at 8 p.m. last night. After the incident, the administration wing instructed the security staff of the CGO to remain vigilant, and the police have stepped up patrols. The police are investigating the incident and listed it as a suspected case of criminal damage. And that's the news. Thank you for watching.